The alarm rang before the sky even started to change color. He reached for it slowly, as if moving too fast might make the day heavier than it already was. The small room was quiet, except for the soft breathing of his child sleeping on the bed beside him. The place wasn't much peeling paint on the walls, a window that never closed all the way, and a heater that worked only when it felt like it. But it was home. And to him, that mattered. He stayed still for a moment, watching his child sleep. The kid's face was calm, warm, and trusting. The kind of trust that only comes when someone believes the world is safe because a parent is nearby. That look always gave him strength, even when he felt like he had none left. He carefully stood up, trying not to make a sound. Shoes were old and worn, but clean. He believed clean shoes showed respect for work, for people, for himself. In the tiny bathroom, he splashed water on his face and stared at his reflection. The man looking back seemed older than his age. Lines around his eyes told stories of nights with little sleep, days filled with worry, and years of carrying responsibility alone. Life hadn't always been like this. There was a time when laughter filled their home, when dinner wasn't something calculated to the last coin, when hope felt natural. Losing his partner had changed everything. Overnight, grief became a permanent guest. He didn't have time to sit with it. Bills didn't stop just because his heart was broken. His child still needed food, clothes, and someone to say everything will be okay, even when he wasn't sure that was true. Each morning followed the same pattern. Wake up early, get his child ready, walk them to a neighbor who helped watch the kid while he worked, then head to his job, a place that paid little but demanded everything. He was grateful for it anyway. Gratitude became a habit, sometimes even a shield against despair. That morning felt different. Though he couldn't explain why, a strange heaviness sat on his chest, deeper than usual. The air outside was colder than expected, the kind that cuts through thin jackets. He tightened his grip on his child's small hand as they walked. The streets were quiet, shops still closed, city lights glowing like tired stars. When he dropped his child off, he knelt down and fixed their collar. "Be good today," he said with a small smile. "I always am," the child replied, serious and proud. That made him smile bigger than he felt inside. At work, the shift dragged on. Movements were routine, but his mind kept drifting. Around midday, the supervisor asked him to step into the office. The tone was polite, but something in it felt final. The words came slowly. Budget cuts. Downsizing. Nothing personal. He nodded while listening, even thanked the man. That's who he was. He believed in leaving without burning bridges, no matter how unfair things felt. When he walked out, his job badge no longer worked. The door closed behind him with a soft click, louder than any argument. He stood outside for a long time, staring at the street, not sure where to go. The hours he usually spent working now stretched wide and empty. His first thought wasn't about himself. It was about his child. Rent was due. Food was already limited. The pressure hit him all at once, like a wave he hadn't seen coming. Instead of going home, he started walked past streets he'd known for years, past places where memories lived quietly in corners. Walking helped him think. It always had. With each step, he tried to make invisible plans. Temporary work, borrowing money, selling old things. Pride had left him a long time ago. Survival mattered more. As evening came, the sky turned dull and gray. Traffic slowed, lights flickered on, and the city shifted its rhythm. Without realizing it, his feet carried him toward the bridge. It wasn't special, just concrete railings and a view of water moving steadily below. He had crossed it many times before. Tonight, he stopped. Someone stood a few steps ahead, leaning slightly forward, hands resting on the cold railing. The posture felt wrong, too still, too quiet. Most people crossed the bridge without stopping. No one admired the view at this hour. He slowed down. His first instinct was to keep going. He told himself it wasn't his business. He was tired. He had a child waiting for him. He wasn't a hero. It's just a man trying to survive. But something inside him didn't let him move. He thought about nights when he felt like giving up. Times when the world felt too heavy, when grief whispered lies telling him he wasn't enough. He remembered standing alone in the dark, holding back tears so his child wouldn't hear. Without deciding, his body moved closer. The sound of his footsteps broke the silence. The person turned slightly but didn't look at him fully. The wind moved between them, carrying the smell of water and cold metal. "You okay?" he asked, his voice calm but unsure. There was no answer at first. He didn't push. He leaned against the railing a safe distance away, pretending he had all the time in the world. "Long day," he added. Still silence. But the person didn't walk away. He understood then that sometimes presence mattered more than words. Standing there reminded him why he woke up every morning, why he kept going even when life hurt. Because someone depended on him. Because someone believed he would always come back. The city lights reflected in the water below, broken and shaky, like lives trying to hold together. He stayed right there, waiting, not knowing that this quiet moment on an ordinary bridge was about to change more than one life. And that was how it all began. He stood there longer than he expected. The cold slowly crept through his jacket, but he didn't move away from the railing. The person beside him stayed quiet, fingers gripping the metal so tightly their knuckles looked pale. Cars passed behind them, their sounds fading quickly, like the world refusing to slow down for anyone. He cleared his throat softly. "I don't mean to bother you," he said, keeping his voice gentle. "I just thought I'd ask if you're all right." The person let out a shaky breath, the kind that carries more weight than any words. Their eyes stayed fixed ahead. "I don't know," they finally said. The voice sounded tired, not angry, just worn down. "I don't think I am." He nodded, even though the person wasn't looking at him. He wasn't sure why he nodded. Maybe it was his way of saying he understood. "That makes sense," he replied. "A lot of days feel like that." Silence filled the space again, but this time it felt different, less heavy. He rested his elbows on the railing, staring at the water below. "I come here when my head gets too loud," he added. "It helps for a moment." The person turned slightly, just enough to look at him from the side. Their eyes were red, face worn, like someone who hadn't slept well in weeks. "You don't look like someone with a quiet life," they said. He let out a short breath that was almost a laugh. "I'm not," he answered honestly. "I'm just someone who keeps showing up." That seemed to land somewhere. The person loosened their grip on the railing just a bit. "I'm tired of showing up," they admitted. "Every time I do, it feels like I'm invisible." Those words hit him deep. He remembered days when he stood in crowded rooms, yet felt completely alone. Days when grief made him feel unseen even by people who cared. "Being invisible hurts," he said, "especially when you're trying your best." The wind picked up, carrying the sound of the river below. The person swallowed hard. "I lost everything little by little," they said. "Job, family, confidence. I kept telling myself tomorrow would be better. It never was." He listened. Really listened. He didn't interrupt or rush to fix anything. He knew some wounds didn't need advice. They needed air. "I lost someone too," he said carefully. "The kind of loss that changes who you are. I still wake up thinking I'll hear their voice." That person finally faced him fully. "How do you keep going?" they asked. "How do you not just stop?" He thought about that for a long moment. There were so many answers, but none of them felt complete on their own. "Some days I don't do it well," he said. "Some days I barely do it at all. But there's someone depending on me. It's a small person who believes I can handle anything. I can't let them down." The person's eyes filled and they had to look away. "I don't have anyone like that," they said quietly. He shook his head gently. "You have more people than you think," he replied. "You just haven't met them yet." That wasn't something he'd planned to say. It just came out. Simple, honest, minutes passed. Maybe more. Time felt strange on the bridge, like it wasn't rushing them. The person slowly stepped back from the edge, one careful movement at a time, until both feet were firmly on the ground. He didn't react. Didn't celebrate. He knew making it feel dramatic could push them back into fear. Instead, he changed the subject slightly. "It's cold tonight," he said. "You want to sit for a minute?" They nodded. They sat on a bench nearby, shoulders slumped, breathing uneven but steady. He offered them his extra gloves. They hesitated, then took them. "Thanks," they murmured. A siren sounded somewhere far away. He knew someone had probably already noticed them standing too long on the bridge. If help was coming, that was good. He believed in help. He just also believed in humans showing up before systems did. "I don't have answers," he said after a while. "But I know this tonight doesn't get to decide the rest of your life." The person wiped their face quickly. "I didn't think anyone would stop," they admitted. "People usually pretend not to see." He looked down at his hands. "I almost didn't," he confessed. "I was scared. I still am. But I kept thinking about how it feels when no one asks if you're okay." Lights flashed in the distance. Help arrived without chaos, without judgment. He stayed nearby until he was sure the person was being cared for. When they were led away, the person looked back at him. Not with sadness this time, but with something brighter. Gratitude, maybe. Or relief. He gave a small nod, like it was nothing. Like this moment didn't matter much. When he finally turned to leave, the bridge felt different. Lighter. He didn't know why. He walked home under the dim streetlights, his breath fogging the air. His heart still raced, but his steps were steady. That night, after his child fell asleep, he sat on the edge of the bed longer than usual. He stared at the floor, replaying the conversation in his mind. He wondered if he'd said the right things. He feared he'd said too little, but then he remembered the person stepping back from the edge. Remembered the way their shoulders relaxed. Just a bit. He lay down beside his child and closed his eyes. He didn't know it yet. But what he thought was just a moment. A small, quiet choice was already beginning to reach far beyond that bridge. The next morning came faster than he expected. Light slipped through the thin curtains, landing softly on the wall. For a second, he forgot everything. Then the weight of the previous night returned. The bridge. The cold air. The tired eyes of a stranger who had almost given up. He sat up slowly and checked on his child. Still asleep. Peaceful. Safe. That sight settled his heart more than anything. Else could life didn't pause because something meaningful had happened. The day needed to be faced. Breakfast was simple toast, cut into small pieces. Tea poured carefully so it wouldn't spill. He packed a small bag and walked his child to school instead of the neighbor's place. With no job to rush to, he chose that small gift of time. They talked about little things, a drawing assignment, a game at recess. Normal moments that reminded him why he fought so hard to stay steady. After drop-off, reality came back in full force. He spent the day walking from place to place, asking about work. Shops, warehouses, repair centers. Some people listened kindly. Others barely looked up. Each rejection stung a little, but he swallowed it and kept going. He wasn't new to disappointment. By afternoon, his feet were sore and his spirits were low. He sat on a bench outside a public building, staring at passing cars. His mind drifted back to the bridge. He wondered where that person was now. If they were warm, if they were okay, he told himself not to dwell on it. He had done what he could. Days passed. Then weeks. Nothing big changed overnight. Money stayed tight. Some nights he went to bed wondering how long he could keep juggling everything. But something inside him felt quieter. Not happier, just calmer. As if helping someone else had reminded him that he still mattered. Even when life treated him like he didn't. A neighbor noticed him coming home late one evening and asked if he needed help watching his child while he looked for work. Another day, the school counselor offered extra support programs. Small things, easy to miss. But together, they felt like hands reaching out. One afternoon, he received a call about a short-term job unloading deliveries. It wasn't much, but it was honest work. He showed up early every day and stayed late when asked. The work was hard, but the routine gave him purpose again. He never told anyone about the bridge. Not because he was hiding it, but because he didn't see it as something special. To him, it was just a human moment. A choice. Late one evening, he checked his mailbox and found an envelope with the logo of a local community center. At first, he assumed it was just another flyer. But inside was a handwritten note. It thanked him, no details. No explanation. Just a few lines saying someone wanted to express gratitude and hoped he would stop by sometime. His hand shook slightly as he folded the paper. He didn't know how they found him, or why now. A part of him felt nervous. Another part felt curious. That night, he didn't sleep much. The next day, walked to the center after dropping his child at school. The place was modest but welcoming. Posters on the walls spoke about support, recovery, and hope. Voices echoed softly from behind closed doors. A staff member greeted him and asked him to wait. He sat in a chair, heart pounding harder with every passing minute. Then the door opened. The person stepping inside looked familiar, healthier, standing taller, eyes clearer. It took a moment for recognition to settle. When it did, breath caught. They looked at each other in silence before a smile slowly appeared. "I hoped it was you," the person said. He stood up, unsure what to say. You seem okay," he managed. "I am," they replied. "Because of you." They spoke for a long time. About that night. About what came after. About how a single conversation had kept a door open long enough for help to enter. The person explained they now volunteered at the center, helping others who felt trapped by life. "I tried to find you," they said. "I didn't even know your name, but I couldn't forget what you did." He shook his head slowly. "I didn't do much. Anyone would have stopped." They smiled gently. Not everyone does. Before he left, the director of the center spoke with him, asked about his situation, listened carefully, offered support resources, training programs, childcare help. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel alone in the room. That evening, walking home, he realized something had shifted again. Not in an unbelievable way. Not like magic. But real, steady, earned. The bridge no longer felt like a place of fear. It felt like the point where his life quietly began to turn. The weeks that followed felt fuller, heavier, and lighter, all at the same time. He started visiting the community center whenever his schedule allowed. Not because he was asked to, because being there gave him something he hadn't felt in a long time. Balance. The people there didn't treat him like a problem that needed fixing. They asked real questions and waited for real answers. They listened when he explained how hard it was to raise a child alone while trying to stay afloat. No judging looks. No rushed conversations. Just patience. He enrolled in a short training program they recommended. It meant early mornings and late nights, but he was used to exhaustion. The difference now was purpose. Every class felt like a step toward stability, not just survival. At home, his child noticed the change before anyone else. The smiles came easier. The silence between them felt warmer, not tense. Even dinner tasted better, though the meals were still simple. One evening, as he helped with homework, his child looked up and asked, "Are you happy now?" The question caught him off guard. He thought for a moment. "I'm getting there," he said honestly. That seemed to be enough at the center. Kept crossing paths with the person from the bridge. They didn't talk much at first. Sometimes they just exchanged a nod or shared a quiet laugh over coffee. There was no pressure to relive that night. It had already done its work. But one afternoon, they sat together after a long session helping others. The room was quiet, sunlight spilling across the floor. "I still think about that night," the person said softly. "Not because of how close I was to the edge, but because someone cared enough to stop." He stared at his hands. "I didn't know if stopping would make things worse," he admitted. "I was afraid of saying the wrong thing." "You didn't say much," they replied. "That's what saved me." Their words stayed with him. Slowly, his life began to show signs of progress. He secured a more stable job through a connection at the center. The pay still wasn't perfect, but it was steady. The schedule allowed him more time at home. That mattered most. He moved from the cramped apartment into a slightly bigger place. Still modest. Still careful with money? But his child finally had their own room. The joy on that small face made every sacrifice worth it. One weekend, the community center invited him to speak at a small gathering. He hesitated. Public speaking was never his thing. But he agreed, hoping his story might give someone else the courage to hold on a little longer. When he stood in front of the group, his hands shook. He didn't prepare a speech. He simply told the truth. About fear. About loss. About how easy it is to believe you're alone. "I'm not strong," he said. "I just didn't walk away." After the talk, people came up to thank him. He felt uncomfortable with the praise. He still saw himself as the same man from before, tired, worried, trying his best. But he also understood something new now. Impact doesn't always look loud or heroic. Later that day, he walked across the bridge again. This time with his child. They leaned against the railing, pointing at the water below. "It looks like it's always moving," the child said. He smiled. "It is. What's that place?" the child asked. He thought for a moment. "A place where people decide to keep going," he answered. As they walked away, he felt a quiet pride. Not the kind that swells the chest. The kind that settles into your bones and reminds you that you did something right when it counted. He didn't know what the future would bring. There were still bills. Still worries. Still days when fear knocked louder than hope. But he also knew this. He wasn't walking alone anymore. What had started as an ordinary night on an ordinary bridge had turned into a connection that changed lives in ways no one could have planned. And though the story wasn't finished yet, he finally believed it was going somewhere good. Time moved forward in quiet ways. Not fast, not dramatic, just steady. The kind of steady that gives life room to breathe. Mornings in the new place felt different. Light filled the rooms more easily. He still woke up before the alarm most days, but now it wasn't just worry pulling him out of sleep. There was something else there too. Expectation, maybe, or belonging. He packed lunches, tied shoes, and walked his child to school when he could. Those walks became their favorite part of the day. They talked about everything and nothing at all. The weather, friends. Dreams that shifted with each passing week. He listened more than he spoke, learning who his child was becoming. Work remained hard, but it no longer felt endless. He knew his schedule. He knew when the next paycheck was coming. That knowledge alone lifted a weight he had carried for years. Some evenings he came home tired, hands sore and back aching. But his mind felt clear. He stayed involved with the community center. Sometimes he helped move chairs or set up meetings. Other times, he simply sat with someone who needed to talk. He never tried to sound wise. He just showed up the way he had that night on the bridge. The person he had met there became a quiet friend. Not someone who needed saving anymore, but someone who understood. They shared coffee once a week, sometimes in silence, sometimes laughing at small things. Neither of them felt the need to explain the bond. It existed without effort. One afternoon, as winter faded into early spring, his child came home with an award from school. Nothing big, just recognition for kindness. For helping another student who was struggling, he held the paper in his hands longer than necessary. "Why did you help?" he asked gently. The answer came easily. "Because they looked lonely?" He didn't say much after that. He didn't need to. He understood exactly where that instinct came from. Later that week, he walked past the bridge alone, not to cross it, just to pause. The water below moved the same way it always had. Cars passed. People hurried by, each carrying their own story. He leaned against the railing, feeling the cold metal under his palms, and breathed. He thought about how close his life had come to breaking more than once. About nights when he wondered if his child would be better off without his constant struggle. About the heavy lie that told him he wasn't enough. He knew better now. Not because everything was perfect. Not because pain had disappeared. But because he had seen what one moment of kindness could do, how it could turn someone away from an edge, how it could grow quietly and return when it was needed most. That evening, as he cooked dinner, his child set the table without being asked. Small hands, moving carefully, proudly. He watched from the stove, heart full in a way that had nothing to do with money or success. After dinner, they sat together on the floor, sharing stories. His child asked about the future, about what things might look like in 5 years. He smiled. "I don't know everything," he said, "but I know we'll face it together." That answer felt true. Weeks later, the community center held another small gathering. This time, he wasn't asked to speak. He was asked to stand among others who had helped in unseen ways, teachers, neighbors, strangers who chose not to walk away. As he looked around the room, he realized how many lives were held together by simple choices: listening, stopping, caring. On the walk home that night, the city felt quieter. Not because it had changed, but because he had. At home, he tucked his child into bed. The room was warm, safe. "I'm glad you're my parent," the child said, half asleep. His chest tightened, and he brushed a hand over their hair. "I'm glad you're here," he responded. When the apartment grew still, he sat alone for a while, thinking about the road behind him. The nights of fear. The days of doubt. The bridge. He understood now that life didn't always reward effort right away. Sometimes it worked in circles. Sometimes the good you put into the world came back through people you never expected. He turned off the light and lay down. Not as a man running from the future, but as someone ready to meet it. The bridge would always stand where it was. A simple structure of concrete and steel. But for him, it would forever mark the moment when choosing compassion changed everything. Not with noise. Not with glory. But with a quiet strength that carried him and those he loved forward, and that was enough. Life has a way of testing people right after things begin to settle. Just when he started to believe he could finally breathe, a new challenge quietly appeared. It started with a letter. Plain envelope. No warning. Just another piece of mail mixed in with bills and school notices. He opened it while standing in the kitchen, his child at the table drawing something colorful. The letter talked about changes at work. New management. Restructuring. Shifts might be adjusted. Nothing was certain yet. His heart sank. But he didn't panic. Not this time. He folded the letter and put it away. Then he sat down at the table and asked his child about the drawing. It showed two people holding hands near water. A bridge was drawn in the background, simple but clear. "That's us," the child said proudly. He smiled softly, feeling something tighten in his chest. Over the next few weeks, the workplace became tense. Whispers replaced jokes. Schedules changed without notice. Some people left. Others waited, unsure of what tomorrow would bring. In the past, this uncertainty would have crushed him. But now he handled it differently. He updated his resume. He checked in with the community center. He kept saving small amounts when he could. Prepared, not scared. One evening after work, a coworker broke down in the parking lot. Rent problems. Family trouble. Fear. Without thinking, he stayed. They sat on the curb, talking, while the night grew quiet. He didn't offer solutions. Just listened the same way he once listened on a bridge. Before leaving, the coworker thanked him, saying it helped more than they expected. On the walk home, he realized something important. The strength he thought he borrowed from survival had turned into something else. Confidence, not loud, not proud, just steady. At the community center, he was asked to help guide a small support group. He almost said no. He still didn't see himself as someone with answers. But he remembered how much it had mattered when someone simply showed up for him. The group met once a week. Ordinary people. Ordinary pain. Extraordinary honesty. He shared parts of his story carefully. About raising a child alone. About loss. About fear that never fully disappears. Faces around the room nodded. Some cried quietly. Others sat straighter, like they were borrowing courage from the space itself. At home, evenings became richer. They cooked together, cleaned together. Sometimes they just sat and listened to music. Peace became a habit. One weekend, they visited the river park near the bridge. Children played. Couples walked hand in hand. Life carried on without knowing how close any of it came to breaking. His child skipped stones into the water. "Do you ever get scared again?" the child asked suddenly. He thought carefully before answering. "Yes," he said. "But I don't listen to fear the way I used to." It seemed to make sense. The letter from work finally turned into news. Ours would change, but his position was safe. Relief washed over him, not sharp but deep. That night, after his child fell asleep, he sat by the window and looked out at the city lights. He thought about how his life now included space for others. Not because he had everything figured out, But because he knew what it meant to feel lost, he understood then that the story wasn't really about the bridge. It was about becoming the kind of person who stops, the kind of person who stays, and the kind of person who passes that strength forward. As he turned off the light, he felt ready for whatever came next. Not because the future was easy, but because he finally trusted himself to face it. Change rarely announces itself loudly. Most of the time, it slips in quietly and waits to see if you notice. For him, Part 7 of his life unfolded that way. One morning, a message appeared on his phone from the community center. They were organizing a citywide event focused on awareness, support, and connection. Nothing flashy, just people sharing real experiences so others wouldn't feel alone. They asked if he would help coordinate it. He stared at the screen longer than usual. The old version of him would have said no right away. Too busy, too risky, too much attention. But this version paused. He agreed. Planning the event took weeks. Meetings after work. Notes scribbled on scraps of paper. Calls made during lunch breaks. It was tiring, but it felt meaningful. Each name added to the list represented someone who had once been overwhelmed and was now willing to stand in the open at home. His child watched him prepare flyers and schedules. "Is this your job now?" the child asked. He smiled. "It's part of it." The day of the event arrived quietly. No crowds pushing, no cameras flashing, just people showing up, some nervous, some hopeful, some unsure why they came at all. He stood near the entrance, greeting visitors, guiding them inside. Every familiar face felt like proof that healing could spread without noise. At one point, he noticed someone standing near the edge of the crowd. The posture felt familiar. Arms crossed, eyes scanning exits. He recognized that look instantly, without hesitation. He walked over. "Glad you came," he said gently. The person looked surprised. "I wasn't sure I should be here," he nodded. "Most people aren't." They talked for a while. Nothing deep. Just enough to break the wall of fear. By the end of the conversation, the person stayed. Later, when the program began, he wasn't scheduled to speak. But someone had asked him to say a few words anyway, unplanned, unscripted. He stepped forward, heart pounding, and took a breath. "I used to think strength meant handling everything alone," he said. "Now I know it also means stopping when someone else is hurting." The room stayed silent. "I didn't change my life overnight. I just made one choice not to walk away. And that choice kept echoing." He didn't say more than that. After the event ended, people lingered. Conversations continued in small circles. Strangers exchanged phone numbers. Laughter mixed with tears. That night, walking home with his child, the air felt lighter. His child squeezed his hand and said, "You help a lot of people," he answered honestly. "I let people help me too." Weeks later, a local paper reached out, asking to feature the community event. He hesitated but agreed to a short mention. No photos. No spotlight. When the article ran, he didn't even read it at first. Friends from the center mentioned it in passing. That was enough. What mattered more was the slow change he saw around him. More people checking on neighbors. More quiet conversations between strangers. Small things adding up at work. Another opportunity opened, this time, to mentor new staff. He accepted, remembering how lost he once felt in unfamiliar spaces. One late evening, he crossed the bridge alone again. He stopped in the same place. The water moved steadily, reflecting city lights. He wasn't there because he was sad. He was there to remember. He remembered the man he used to be, tired, scared, unsure if he was enough. He remembered the decision that changed everything. He rested his hands on the railing and smiled softly. Somewhere behind him, footsteps passed without stopping. Somewhere ahead, someone else would pause one day. Unsure what to do, and because of the life he had lived since that night. He knew exactly what he would choose. He would stop, he would stay, and sometimes that would be enough. The year that followed did not arrive gently. It came in pieces, each one testing how much he had truly grown. The kind of tests that don't announce themselves but appear in ordinary moments. disguised as small choices. It began with exhaustion. Not the kind that sleep fixes, but the deeper kind that settles into the muscles and stays there. Between work, helping at the community center, and raising his child alone, he often went to bed already tired for the next day. Still, he woke up. He always did. His child was growing fast, taller, quieter in some ways, more curious in others. They asked questions about fairness, about people who lived on the streets, about why some families struggled more than others. He answered honestly, without fear. Life doesn't treat everyone the same, he said one night while washing dishes together. But how we treat each other still matters. Those words would return to him later, in a way he didn't expect. At work, the mentoring role expanded. Management noticed that new workers stayed longer when paired with him. Not because he trained them better, but because he listened. He noticed when someone looked overwhelmed. He spoke quietly when others shouted. One afternoon, a supervisor pulled him aside. Nothing official. Just a conversation. There was talk of advancement, more responsibility. The offer came with better pay, but fewer flexible hours. He didn't answer right away. That night, after his child fell asleep, he paced the kitchen. More money would ease pressure, but less time would cost something else. He knew that cost too well. He chose balance. He thanked them and declined. Years ago, that decision would have terrified him. Now, it felt right. Not easy. Just right, the community center began seeing more visitors. Word spread quietly. People came in carrying stories they had never spoken aloud. Some evenings, he left drained but grateful. He learned that carrying hope also required rest. Then came the call. Late one evening, his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. He almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. The voice on the other end sounded shaken. A parent. Alone. Their child had gone missing for a few hours after school. Panic had already taken over. He didn't hesitate. He asked questions calmly. Retraced steps. Remembered how fear feels when it sits behind the ribs and makes thinking difficult. They found the child safe before the night ended. When it was over, the parent hugged him tightly, crying in relief. I didn't know who else to call, they said. The word stayed with him that night. Lying awake, he wondered how many people reached out not because he had answers, but because he stayed steady when everything felt like it might collapse. Weeks later, winter arrived slowly. Mornings grew darker. Evenings felt longer. He noticed more people struggling as the cold set in. One night, while closing up the community center, he saw someone sitting outside on the steps. Head down, shoulders shaking, he recognized that posture instantly. He sat beside them without speaking. Let silence do its work. After a while, the person whispered, I don't want to be invisible anymore. He answered gently. You're not. They talked until the building lights turned off automatically. Before leaving, the person smiled weakly and said, You remind me of someone I wish I'd met earlier in life. He walked home under falling snow, thinking about how often life waits until the breaking point before offering connections at home. His child had left him a note on the fridge. Simple handwriting. A small heart drawn carefully. Thank you for always coming back. He closed his eyes for a moment, hand pressed against the paper. In spring, a setback arrived without warning. The company he worked for announced budget issues. Not layoffs. Yet, just uncertainty. Fear knocked again, but fear no longer lived unchecked inside him. He prepared. Updated paperwork. Checked resources. Talked openly with his child, without panic. We'll figure it out, he said. And for the first time in his life, he believed it. One afternoon, the community center organized a quiet walk across the bridge. Not a march. Not a protest. Just people walking together, honoring life. He almost didn't go. Crowds still made him uneasy, but his child wanted to. They walked hand in hand, step by step. No speeches. No signs. Just movement. Halfway across, his child squeezed his hand. This is where you stopped, right? He nodded. I'm glad you did, the child said simply. The walk ended without applause. People drifted away quietly. But something shifted that day. The bridge didn't feel heavy anymore, it felt held. Summer brought warmth and new routines. Picnics, laughter, a sense of normal that once seemed unreachable. One evening, sitting on a park bench, watching his child play, he realized something unexpected. He was no longer living in reaction to the past. He was choosing the present, and that, he understood, was the real miracle. Not money, not recognition, just the freedom to wake up and decide how to live, as the sun set, casting long shadows. He felt gratitude settle quietly inside him. The story had grown larger than a single moment on a bridge. It had become a life shaped by stopping, listening, and staying. And though challenges would come again, as they always do, he knew one thing for certain. He would meet them standing, with both feet on solid ground, and with a heart still open enough to care.